the governor in terms of their responsibility for discharging their constitutional responsibilities. So whether that is insight into what's going on in the Executive Council, an understanding of Anguilla, the cultural context, the role of the deputy governor is quite instrumental in ensuring that the governor has that type of input and insight into whatever they may be contemplating.
Right. You mentioned the 7 permanent secretaries as well. And there's a hierarchy, so to speak. You'll have the deputy governor, and then you'll have permanent secretaries in each of the ministerial portfolios, and so on. Again, they report to you, and as you rightfully said, you, in essence, you are the head of the civil service. That in and of itself, I'm sure, would have presented quite a bit of challenges over the years, because it's something like, 1,000 or 1,100 or 900, over 1,000 civil servants, of course, and we all have different ideas. We have different approaches to the way we do things, and so on and so forth. But it just explain a bit about some of the challenges, and then some of the the rewards, so to speak, because I'm sure there are peaks and valleys in terms of carrying out your duties on a daily basis. There are some things where you tap yourself, and there are other things where, hey, something else could have been done, or there are difficult discussions and decisions that will have to take place with the various whether permanent secretaries or civil servants. Just give us an idea, in terms of some of the challenges.
Right. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that this is the best job I've ever had in my entire life. In my adult life, I am enjoying it. I wake up every day looking forward to the challenge. I think the ability to serve the country at this level is something that I would have never imagined in my younger years. So I'm very happy about the work. I'm very excited about the challenge. And I think, like I said, this is the best job I've ever had. And I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity. For me, I'm very fortunate in that I'm supported by a very strong and dedicated cadre of public servants at every level, from the permanent secretary to department heads on down. We wake up every morning, the first thing on our mind is how do we make the lives of the people of Anguilla better? I think that's the core of what we do. Now, over the last couple of years, I've had to lead the public service through a hurricane, through a pandemic. I think we'd have had at least 3 elections in that period. And every single day, the challenge is just a tremendous one. So I'm very grateful to have that opportunity. But more than anything else, our job is to make sure that we improve the lives of the people of Anguilla, and the public service exists to do more than anything else, to solve the agenda of the government of the day. We don't have political identity separate and apart from whatever the policies are of the government of the day. And our job is to ensure that that mandate is delivered.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the satisfaction with the job thus far, and while we're at it, you also spoke about this being the best job that you've had in your adult life. What was the pathway towards being the deputy governor? Your background in terms of whether it was law, finance, or anything else.
I think the push, my journey to where I am now started way back in the mid-90s, during the years of the transshipment era, when when the government of Angola was doing really, really well from those transshipment monies. I was very fortunate to be one of several persons who would have been awarded government scholarship to attend university. At the time, I was working at Barclays, and this opportunity came up. I was very fortunate to have been awarded a scholarship, and I went off to Howard University in 1999. Now, at the time, my mom came along with me, and God bless her, I was very fortunate. She came along with me to help me get settled in. She was in one line dealing with the financial matters, while I was in another line dealing with the academic stuff, registering for courses. This was before things were done online, but you had to go to your academic advisor. They will give you a form, you had to tick boxes, and then take it to somebody who put it in the computer. So that was my experience in the first instance. My first year at university didn't do so well. It was winter. I was in Washington, D.C., Howard University in Washington, D.C. It was very cold. Started in January, so that first semester was really, really was really terrible. I had difficulty waking up. So I'm not gonna I've said it publicly before. However, after the end of that first year, when I was on my way back to school, I had to take care of everything, academics and the financial side of it. And when I opened that envelope, because you had to go to you had to bring your grades in, you go to the treasury, you get a check and all these different things. And when I saw the figure on that check, and I realized, it hit me that the people of Angola has made a significant investment in me, my education, and my future. So at that moment, I realized that, you know what, I do owe it to the people of Angola to give them a return on this investment. So that was for me the aha moment in terms of, hey, taking this whole idea of studying public service and giving back seriously. My mom was also a huge influence on me in my role in public service. Both her and my dad were career public servants, so I guess it ran in the family. So I think from that moment on, it became clear to me that I needed to make my dedication to the Angola public by a life and career in public service, and that is what put me on my journey. I was fortunate enough to be appointed the Deputy Registrar of Companies over at the Commercial Registry. From there, I moved on to Trade and Investment Officer. I did a lot of work in promoting trade and investment in Angola, bringing MOUs and lots of development and so forth. And then from there, I was appointed the Compliance Manager, where I did some work on financial services, compliance matters, and so forth. And from there, I moved on to being the Comptroller of Inland Revenue. And then from there, the opportunity to apply for the post of Deputy Governor came up. I applied, went through two rounds of interviews, and I was successful in that endeavor. And here I am today, sitting next to you, having this conversation.
All right, good. You said you're a graduate of Howard University. That's a HBCU.
Correct, a historical and black college and university.
Black colleges and university. I would have graduated myself from Tuskegee, which is a HBCU as well. So again, congratulations on your ascension to be deputy governor, and your study and your work thus far. We've got quite a lengthy program tonight because there's quite a bit to talk about in terms of the civil service. So in terms of, there are a number of things that are going on, and I want to ask you about a few of those things.
Sure.
And first up on my list, there is a public sector transformation,
Correct.
that is taking place or has taken place in Anguilla. There are a number of PWC, and so on and so forth. But first of all, tell us about that whole public sector transformation and the need for it.
Okay, that's a very important question, and I'm glad you led with that, because I'm quite happy to discuss it. I think first of all, I think the expectations from the public of government and the public service has changed tremendously. We have a very engaged public. People are much more discerning. They want value for money. They want to know that the tax dollars are being well spent, and they want value for money. So I think it's necessary because, number one, expectations have changed, of government has changed. Number two, the public want quicker, faster, more efficient and responsive services. And a lot of our systems and processes have simply not kept pace with the expectations of the public. So all of what we're doing really is about modernizing the public service and ensuring that we can better meet the needs of the people of Angola. So that is the foundational, that's the rationale for why we are undergoing this reform process at this point.
Yeah. Those of us, DG, that would have been fortunate enough to be around the political bloc for some time, been elected, over and over again. I'm a classic example of that, so to speak, being a minister on 2 previous occasions. The role of the senior civil servants, the permanent secretaries, and the ministry, and the ministers. I noticed that, in the independent countries, when, let's say, there's a change in administration, there's also a change in, let's say, the hierarchy, the civil servants and so on. We still being a British overseas territory, and I don't know if that is a general route, but we follow the path of once you become a permanent secretary, you are within the permanent secretary realm until I suppose you retire. There have been shifts in permanent secretaries from time to time and so on. But again, from your vantage point, how do you see the role of, let's say, the permanent secretaries, their role working with the ministers themselves? Because at the end of the day, I mean, I would know what it's like to go out there and campaign and to be sitting on people's porches and stuff like that and, soliciting their vote and their support. So from your vantage point, I mean, that relationship, because we all are human beings, and folks will have their own, preferential political leanings one way or another. But at the end of the day, it's about Anguilla. And what you think about that sort of relationship, how would you describe that, and how can it be enhanced or improved, as we go along?
Yeah, it's an issue that comes up time and time again. People look at the American system where that administration changes and then it takes out the entire personnel.
Yeah,
that
even
were
in some of the
there
Caribbean islands, the same kids and.
I don't think it's a function of us being a British territory per se, because if you look at most of the Commonwealth countries, they operate a similar regime where you have a permanent professional public service whose job, and again, the fundamental principles of the public service and how the public service is supposed to operate, that we are an apolitical entity. We do not have a political personality separate and apart from the sitting administration. So every public servant, and it's set out throughout our general orders, throughout our PSC regulations, that our responsibility is to serve the agenda of the government of the day. No matter what your political leanings are, no matter what your personal views or opinions are, you have a duty and a responsibility to serve the agenda of the government of the day. Now, the whole point of having a professional public service is that you give your technical advice in the best way you know how. And if your minister comes with a proposal, it is your responsibility to give that minister the proper technical advice based on your experience, your qualifications, and your knowledge and expertise about whatever the particular initiative the minister has proposed. But at the end of the day, once you've done that respectfully and professionally, once the decision is taken, your responsibility is to get that decision done, to get it implemented post haste. Don't drag your feet, don't drag it out, and so forth. In terms of the quality of advice, I think that comes down to the trust between the minister and whoever the official is, whether it's a permanent secretary or department head. I think your responsibility is to, as a public servant, is to build that relationship with the minister to ensure that the minister trusts your advice, relies on you for that technical input in order for them to be I don't want to use the word guided, but to be informed by whatever it is you're contemplating. So fundamentally, the public service is politically neutral. We don't take a view on the political decisions. That's not our responsibility. Our job is to provide good, timely advice. And I think what we have done over the last month, I think you would have participated in that training recently. We've had Caricat in here, who would have done some training with yourself, your ministerial colleagues, and the permanent secretary to kind of discuss those issues. How do we improve the working relationship? And I think it comes down to trust more than anything else.
You mentioned early on that the expectations of the public, general public, is pretty high. They've changed over the years, and taking into consideration, the continuity of the permanent secretaries, the technical people, that could have its advantages and its disadvantages as well. And as you know, the political directive and the political candidates and those who become ministers. One day you can be Mr. Rogers, right after the election you can become a minister of government. There is no preparation, so to speak, for the ministerial responsibilities. There are bumps and bruises as you go along on your first time. I mean, I can attest to that.
I remember you used to call yourself the rookie at one point.
Yes, I was the rookie. And the thing about it is that it is critical, the role that, the permanent secretary and senior civil servants play at that level. But then again, it is important that the senior civil servants understand, the political dynamics from which we,
Yeah.
the elected individuals come from, because at the end of the day, after 5 years, we are held accountable to the electorate for being here. So I think, and you mentioned it, that sort of trust, at the end of the day, while, those senior individuals should be apolitical, of course they're human beings. But I think the underlying principle here is that we've got to be working for the people of Anguilla as you move forward.
What I will say,
There are some issues, when you go forward, and we'll talk about them a little later.
again, we don't have to shy away from these things at all. I think
Right.
we would have done a retreat, I think it was early back in January, with myself, your colleagues, the permanent secretaries, and I've said it publicly, we discussed it at the meeting that we had at the high school auditorium recently. Just to piggyback on your point about what it takes to be where you are, the Honorable Minister for Social Development, Mrs. Rogers-Webster, her intervention, I think, was very timely as it relates to the permanent secretaries, giving us, and myself as well, in terms of the appreciation of the many hats that you as politicians wear, your parliamentary representatives, your ministers, and sometimes there's an intersection between the two that we as public servants need to understand and appreciate, and are very grateful for her for that intervention. And I think it really opened eyes to a lot of us senior public servants as well, for us to understand the full context under which you operate. And I think that went a long way in kind of shaping how we approach the advice that we give to you as ministers and political advisors.
Yeah. And there are very few civil servants who become ministers, going through the process.
Yeah.
Very few. But be that as it may, you mentioned early on in terms of general orders. Now, I was a civil servant way back in 1977 or 78. I started to teach at the now Adrian T. Hazel School, and I taught at, the now Aurelia Kelly School, and, work with government and so on and so forth, right? The general orders, I mean, that is archaic. I mean, that document, that's been there probably before some of the folks in this room were born, So you spoke about modernizing that.
Yeah.
And tell me where we are with respect to that.
I have a copy of the general orders, and there's a stamp in it from 1956. And if you look at the current version of general orders, you will recognize, I would say, more than half of the language from that 1956 document is still very much present in the document that we have today, which means that we are operating on a regime that was built. That's the version I have is from 1956. I'm pretty certain that it existed perhaps prior to that. Now, it doesn't take a rocket science or a genius to understand that the foundations that were built back in the 1950s, there's no reflection to what the modern public service looks like today. So this whole idea of reforming, revising general law has been knocking around for quite some time. And I think we have realized the limitations of the current, again, it's such an archaic, old setup. It has served us well, I must say. It has served us well. However, there are some very obvious gaps when it comes to discipline, accountability, the recruitments and so forth. There are quite a bit of significant gaps, things like performance management and so forth are quite significant. And we've engaged an entity called Public Administration International. They're based in they're out of the UK. However, they've appointed the consultant who's been appointed is actually from Barbados. She's done work in the BVI, she's done work in Barbados and so forth. So she's very familiar with the Caribbean. She's familiar with the cultural issues. She's familiar with just the way we operate. And she's been working very diligently on that. We've had input from the ministers, from permanent secretaries. We've done a retreat to the permanent secretaries to kind of inform and shape the direction of that document. And it's proven to be quite a challenge, because like I said, we've been operating on a document from 1956. And so it's not a question of trying to build on an old foundation. We're literally trying to start from scratch, because that document just simply doesn't reflect what a modern public service looks like, how it's supposed to operate. Things like flex time, performance management, things like technology. That 1956 document doesn't recognize any of that.
Right.
So the way the modern public service is now and what a modern public service expects is totally different. So that's one of the key reasons why we've embarked on this process of trying to rewrite the general orders and the PS public service commission regulations.
Right.
And what I hear a lot from senior public service as well is that in order to deal with any matter, you've got to be flipping between the general orders and the PSC regulations. Sometimes there are gaps, sometimes there are lacunas, sometimes there are differences. So we just have to make sure that the regime reflects what a modern public service ought to look like.
Well, a lot of times, as a result of that, the archaic, the general orders and the public service commission regulations and so on, at the end of the day, it'll go back to discipline. You mentioned about discipline. And the civil servants over the years have gotten a by, I should say, in terms of discipline, because if you're in the private sector, your roles and responsibilities are laid out, and there is an expectation, of performance, of accountability, and the likes. I would hope that in reviving or amending or modernizing the general orders, that those sort of things would be included in the new general orders, so to speak, because to be frank, we don't have a very good record of discipline in the civil service. We don't have a very good record of performance and accountability, so to speak. So I am glad that you mentioned those sort of things. For me, performance, yes, discipline, accountability, and all of those, fancy terminology. But it has to be monitored, and folks must be made accountable for their actions, their inactions, and behaviors, and so on and so forth. So I'm glad that modernizing the general orders and the PSC regulation is part and parcel of what is taking place going forward. Right? So I'm satisfied to hear that. But then again, I like timelines. I'm one of these folks. So I didn't do very well in English while I was going to school. Math and chemistry and physics. I was on the science block, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I like results.
Yeah.
Having it is good and it's necessary, but the results and the monitoring of it, is what is a critical importance. How you think we need to approach that?
I'm going to make a couple points on that, because again, I'm not going to sugarcoat. I'm not going to shy away from the performance and accountability issues that you've mentioned. I'm sure everybody can talk about something they've heard happen in the public service.
But at the end of the day, even the performance and stuff is going to come back to you.
Which is why I said I'm not going to shy away from
right.
it. And I've said publicly on many occasions, I think for my time in office, one of my greatest missteps was allowing the performance management regime that we had in place to falter. And I will take responsibility. As a leader in this position, if you cannot acknowledge and accept your mistakes, then you shouldn't be in the job.
True.
But at the same time, I'm just as determined to make sure that when you bring it back, it works. Because when you marry that with what we're doing on the pay and compensation, which I guess we'll talk that at some point. The fact of the matter is, if you're talking about pay and compensation, the public expects that persons will perform, and if they're not performing, then they'll be dealt with accordingly. One of my colleagues said to me that when it comes to the public, you've got to manage people up or out. There's no in between. So I acknowledge completely that there are some performance concerns and accountability issues which we are seeking to address now through our restructuring and rewriting of the general orders. The second thing I'd like to mention on that too is that no matter how, again, as you correctly noted, we could have the best written version of general orders, PSC regs on the books, but unless persons are prepared to have those awkward and difficult conversations with their subordinates, then the whole thing is for naught. So we've engaged CARICAT to assist us on the leadership training as well, to make sure that persons in leadership positions know how to have those difficult and awkward conversations with persons when it comes to performance and accountability. Because I find one of the biggest barriers is the smaller civil society, is the fact that we find it difficult to have those awkward conversations with persons in our charge. And I do empathize with some of the department heads, to be quite frank, because when I was appointed controller of inland revenue, that was my first stint as a department head, the person in the seat with the responsibility. And I did find it difficult as well, because some of the persons in my department were older than me, persons who I knew personally, persons who would have known my family and what's not. And I did find it quite difficult to engage them on certain performance issues. So I empathize with especially our younger department heads in taking on those challenges. But the fact of the matter is, we just have to do it. So over time, you would have learned to build up the courage, the responsibility, and the maturity to take these things on. But strong leadership is not an accident, and which is why we're not going to leave it to chance now.
Right.
So I'm very excited about what we've done with CARICAD. We've engaged them to provide some leadership training for a cohort of our senior public servants. As I said publicly before, myself, you, the Premier, all of us were part of that session. So I think it's important that we need strong leadership more than anything else.
Yes.
Well, I think if all anybody knows is that the DG is the head of the public service, which is fine. I take the responsibility and I wear it with pride. Right. However, I do think some of us need to be a bit more courageous in terms of taking on the responsibility of leadership. If you're in the seat, then you've got to take on the good and the bad.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
You mentioned that one of your colleagues, mentioned in terms of the civil servants, up or out. That's a pretty sharp way to look at it, so to speak. There are concerns in the general public in terms of some civil servants who may not perform to the level of expectation. Yet on the performance review, there is no record of certain anomalies and certain misconducts and those things. And people will think, well, those are the individuals without accountability that are moved up, and as opposed to moving out, they may move across, in terms of transfers.
That is a comment I've heard many times over the years, going way back to the 70s. That's how we deal with things in the public service.
People, we're a small community. People point to individuals, to civil servants, who have been, either transferred or moved out of a particular department, not necessarily, let's say, in terms of being upward movement, but, you got problematic civil servants who, maybe push one way or another, in those sort of things. So I am hoping that, as you mentioned about the discipline, the accountability and performance and so on and so forth, that there will be consequences for, certain actions and those sort of things. So,
but what I will say, though, in all of those cases when you talk about transfers and so forth, sometimes it's not necessarily a performance issue or a discipline issue per se. Sometimes it's just about fit. Sometimes it's about persons who have hit the limit in a current position and would have benefited from a change. And I've seen, I can think of, I don't want to name them specifically, but I can think of at least 3 instances where persons were transformed and their performance actually, because it wasn't a performance issue, it wasn't it's just these persons had gotten to a point where they wanted to do something different. We get those requests.
Yeah.
The public administration has been inundated with lots of requests for transfers, people wanting to experience different things, wanting to work on different portfolios, have different interests and what's not. So we try to accommodate those things as best we can, and I find in my experience, it has worked tremendously. These persons have found a new lease, new interest, new vigor, new energy, and their performance has been tremendous.
Yeah, and on the flip side of that, I mean, some of the folks, who have been, transferred one way or another, Some take the elevator to the top
That's
floor,
what I'm saying. You know,
and
they have
others take the
have,
escalator down.
excel. You know, have excel.
You know, so a lot of times, you know, in terms of being
No,
fit for purpose.
one
So,
officer had said to me, he
yeah,
said, Mr. Bradley was upset with you for a good 6 months, you know, but this was the best thing ever happened to me.
Yeah.
You know, and so when you get comments like that, you kind of realize that, okay,
Yeah, so-
you know, that once people have these opportunities,
Yeah.
they excel.
but you know, like I said, it's a frank and open conversation.
Yeah, of course, of course.
Just the facts, you know. Some go that route, take that trajectory, and others, like I said, take the escalator down as well. So, in terms of the training and fit for purpose in certain roles, of course, those of us who would have gone the academic route, sometimes you don't necessarily have to specialize, or major in a particular area in order to be able to function. Hence, politicians are a classic example. I'm sure that less than 10% of all politicians would have done political sciences in school and so on and so forth. So there's a fit there.
Yeah.
Because my old man, who had never went to high school or anything like that, he told me one time, he said, education is the application of knowledge. You can acquire education by various means.
Correct.
In a classroom, on the streets, on a construction site, just about anywhere, so to speak. But you've got to be able to apply that knowledge. And we have some individuals who would have done very well academically and really and truly, doesn't know, if the toilet doesn't flush, what to do. So, but I just say that, to bring us to the next point that I would want to talk about is the leadership. You mentioned it before, and it is critical in terms of continuity, in terms of working in the best interest for the people of Anguilla, so that we have succession planning in terms of leadership roles. You know what I'm saying? Because as you move on and you move up the ranks and so on, human nature is such. You look on the other side, the grass is greener there. You move on. And so on and so forth. So in terms of the leadership development and placement of these leaders that we would prepare in terms of the civil service, how are we going about with that again, and how do we intend to monitor that sort of training?
I think when we go back to two documents I want to point to. One, when Dr. Clark, our consultant, had done the discussions with, I think she over 200 persons. She would have spoken to, would have gotten their feedback, and would have presented a report in terms of setting out some of the concerns that persons have come to. And when we set out the transformation plan as well that we launched back in, I think it was February, that set these things out. Leadership was a key issue. I don't think anybody can run away from that. The fact of the matter is that they felt that they needed to strengthen leadership in the Anguilla Public Service. Again, as I said publicly before, I'm not absolving myself of that as well. So I myself was included as part of that cadre of leadership training. So we would have identified the top of the public service, the permanent secretaries, and those from grades down to grade C to take part in this leadership training that was run by CARICAD. The first cohort, and that program goes all the way down to July. I think it's a very intensive, very robust leadership program, because we don't want to lead leadership up to chance. Some of these persons are already in position, those who are department heads, deputy department heads, or principal assistant secretaries. They are all part of this program, because again, we don't want to leave good leadership up to chance. They've had sessions on performance management, having the difficult conversations, preparing good, strong policy, how you provide advice to the minister, to executive council, and so forth. We don't want to leave this to chance. So we've been making a major investment in this program with CARICAD, and we've identified those persons. And the plan is to make sure that this leadership training trickles all the way down to the entire public service. So I'm very pleased with how that's going. The feedback I've received from several of those participants in it was quite intense, very robust, and I'm looking forward to what comes of it come to July. Because over the next 4 to 5 years, we will need 4 permanent secretaries because of retirement and various reasons, at least 4 permanent secretaries. We've got one retiring this year. Another's going to retire the year after,
Right.
and the year after that. So between now and 2030, we will need at least 4 permanent secretaries. These are quite senior positions, and again, we've been very intentional about providing investment in the training to ensure that the future of the public service is one that we can count on, that people are well trained, properly prepared, and well qualified. So that's one of the things I'm focused on now with CARICAD, to ensure that we provide the training, offer the support that we want. Again, good leadership is not an accident, and we want to be very intentional about preparing the next generation of leaders.
You mentioned, you know, the retirement of at least 4 permanent secretaries over the next, 4 years. And they will be replaced, they must be replaced. So in terms of the, the preparation for replacement of these senior, because these are ultra senior really civil servants, where are we, how do we measure, let's say, the applicants that are coming in and so on? Because I think sometimes, you may have somebody who may be acting as a permanent secretary. Doesn't mean because they act as a permanent secretary before that their performance is up to that level, So what are your thoughts in terms of how you see it going forward in terms of replacing those permanent secretaries who will be retiring?
Right. Well, we over the last couple of sessions, we've engaged in a very robust recruitment process that would engage them on the sending application, interviews, and what we call an assessment center. So it's not just based on the application or interview. We also task you with certain assignments, certain presentations, certain scenarios, and so forth, which we expect you as a permanent secretary to be able to handle. This goes beyond simply preparing a mock executive council paper, but it goes on to various scenarios. We present scenarios that have actually happened. We ask them to, how would you handle this particular thing? We give them a certain time frame in which to deliver it. And once it's not, we put together a panel consisting of myself, various persons who might be interested as well. We've also invited persons external to the public service to give a measure of balance to it, to participate in those discussions. So that's the kind of robust process that we've engaged in over the years. Again, it's just not any one metric that we use, and we think that is a much fairer way of assessing applicants.
But make sure that, those folks who will move up and replace those permanent secretaries, at least senior level, what we call a grade B or whatever the senior level is, really and truly they should be, at this point, trying to understand, the role of the minister and the role of the permanent secretaries and how things can be put together. Because you don't want to, let's say, put a new minister in a situation whereby, it is difficult for him or her to perform as a result of having a new permanent secretary who doesn't understand the role or the connection between what is happening. So I think as part of the training, that should also be emphasized as well. Because I'll tell you, being a minister, at times when you want things done, and then there are all sorts of hindrances, I should say, without explanation. Because it's all well and good to say, listen, we can't, you can't do that, or you shouldn't do that, or this is the way to do it. I believe, saying, well, minister, look, this can't be done that way. We probably can get it done another way.
Right.
We've got to find alternatives. But they just don't want to hear, it can't be done. That sort of thing, I guess it could be, not guess, it is frustrating. And at the end of the day, and I'm talking now from an elected standpoint, at the end of the day, we are responsible. You can't go and sit on someone's porch and say, I couldn't get this done because the permanent secretary. For instance, a road example or a light, and those sort of things. So we've got to understand that, and not only that, it is the electorate or that we are politicians, but at the end of the day, they're people, who, the permanents, the public service must serve. Because
No,
I got a question here in terms of service and delivery.
No,
So,
I agree. In
yeah.
one of the modules in that CARICAD training program is exactly that.
Yeah.
Working with ministers and so forth, understanding from the perspective of the minister. As I said, that intervention from Minister Rogers Webster was quite timely in getting persons to understand the nature of things. Now, the current one of the things I wanted to point out too is that in terms of the recruitment process, our Constitution makes it clear that in addition to the Public Service Commission for positions above the rank of from department head and above, requires, in addition to consultation with the Public Service Commission, before the decision is made, consultation with the Premier as well. Now, I don't want anybody to get the impression that the Premier and the politicians dictate what happens to the public service.
Right.
'Cause I'm very adamant that is a bright red line that we should never cross. Like, we do not want to politicize the public service and have politicians dictating who is appointed to what position and what's not. However, there is a mechanism.
And the
by which-
politicians themselves wouldn't want that.
Exactly, but I'm just saying that. But there is a mechanism in which those views are sought. So constitutionally, we are bound to consult with the Premier on appointments of department head and above, and that consultation is quite robust, quite engaging, and once it's not. And I find it to be quite helpful. But at the end of the day, the ultimate decision rests with myself on that.
I learned that way back in 2005 when I was first elected and became a minister in that particular administration. And I'm not afraid to say it, I learned the difference between consultation and advice. So consultation, you're telling me when you got to act on my advice, I am advising you as opposed to consulting. So, the consultation with the Premier, yes, you're telling her, but at the end of the day, it's up to, the public service and so on. I want to touch on another topic here now in terms of the government service. I have it down here, government services delivery.
Yeah.
Right. There's a lot of talk out there, and for the most part, rightfully so. Okay? A lot of complaints about time show up, the tardiness, I should say. If you're going to start to work at 8 o'clock, civil servants trotting in at 8:15, 8:30. And when they get in, the attitude in terms of customer service and so on and so forth is not what is expected of them, And I am hoping that something can be done so that somebody hold the mechanism to hold the civil servants and the public servants who are working in the interest of the public to understand that their responsibility is to get to work on time and be on time. Of course, every now and then you'll be late, but not habitual. And that it is serious, the tardiness, and before 4 o'clock, they're off. We all had kids and had to pick them up, or I shouldn't say kids, children. Had to pick them up and so on. That is our responsibility to make, arrangements to do those things. Not every day or all day, You're serving the public.
Yeah.
And someone said to me when I was having that discussion with them, well, Rogers, why y'all don't have, cards to swipe? I said, but at the end of the day, you can give me your card to swipe. I'm there. You can give me your card. I swipe you out and in and out and so on and so forth. He said, but the technology in y'all are .ai now, so you should have that technology there where it is. Now, excusable at times, but it cannot be habitual the way it is doing right now. And then the customer service training is as if though they come in late and they're angry.
Again, that's a perennial issue that I'm not going to duck or sugarcoat. I myself have experienced that in terms of going to government departments and wanting service and being delayed because somebody didn't turn up or the cashier didn't come or whatever the case would be. So I'm not gonna duck that issue either. To be quite frank, that I have experiences myself. I understand what the public's concerns are with regard to that. However, that was one of those things that was picked up in a report, because again, that consultant spoke to over 200 people from the public service, business persons, politicians, everybody. And that came up as well. Now, over the years, we've tried to address this through electronic monitoring. We do have a system where we expect that when persons come into work, they do clock in, and once it's not. But that's done to various degrees of effectiveness. We do have departments that do have the swipe card and the swipe passes, and once it's not. But I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to line managers addressing these things. It goes back to the point I was making about leadership and people being courageous to take these things on. Again, I don't think it's reasonable for anybody to expect that I, as a deputy governor, to walk around to go and check on the attendance of well over 40 different government departments, and once it's not. I think that's an issue that not even PSs, but department heads in particular ought to be grappling with. You have a department to open at a particular time. I think it's your responsibility to address these issues. Again, I'm not ducking the issue, not throwing anybody under the bus, but if you're a supervisor, you're a manager, then that's part of your job.
Yeah, well, again, the monitoring process, even with the new or the updated general orders and stuff like that, the monitoring of the individuals, given the performance reviews and so on and so forth, needs to be done, and it needs to have teeth, so to speak, because human beings would push the envelope, and if there's no resistance, they'll continue pushing it.
Well,
so there must be consequences.
This week, I would have sat with all the department secretaries except for one, which is going to happen later this week, to do the quarterly review, look at their objectives once it's not, discuss how they're doing. And one of the things that we did discuss, I'm saying, okay, the same way I'm sitting here with you looking at your performance, your objectives, I'm taking it for granted that you are doing the same thing with persons who you are responsible for, to make sure that this trickles on, that this measure of accountability. And in terms of the objectives, what we're looking forward to in the second quarter, right, to make sure. So that's what I've been doing recently, to kind of make sure that these folks understand that accountability in line management matters. That is not just putting some fancy words on a paper, but you've got to have these awkward conversations.
Government services, the responsibility, and that leads to trust as well. And
but on the customer focus point, one of the things we flagged as one of the initiatives in our transformation plan is we want a customer service charter to be posted in every single government department, not just words on a poster, but we want it to be tested regularly, we want it to be probed to ensure that we are delivering high quality service to the discerning taxpaying public. I think that's a very important issue for me personally, that when you go to a government department, that you do receive high quality service that you would expect in a private sector establishment.
Right, and we're moving in healthcare towards that as well. Soft skills training is the same, similar to customer service, but that is tailored, for the healthcare professionals. That program is going to start in June. In June. Every single employee of the Department of Health Services must go through it. And in terms of monitoring, it's going through the Anguilla Community College. And in terms of monitoring it, the invigilators, the instructors will be the ones will put suggestion boxes in all of the health facilities. And the invigilators and the lecturers would be the ones who are monitoring to see how well this is. And there will be consequences in order to deal with it. Because you can go, to the Treasury Department or to IRD, and you could be treated not the way you expect. But when it comes to healthcare services now, it is a different ball game. Nobody's going up to the hospital to be able to to get chicken and chips, as I say. You know what I'm saying? You're either going up there because you need medical attention, or you're going as a relative of someone who's being treated. So that in and of itself, you have to know how to deal with those folks from a customer service, from the soft skills training and so on and so forth. It is paramount, it is important, and it must be done, and it must be monitored, going forward, because that is part and parcel of the entire package. You can do great works, medical works, and the psychological testing is there to prove, well, hey, I don't think it's going to work because this is how they treated me first impression, or they treat me like a hog, they say this, and those sort of things, But we got to work on the customer service, and we got to work on the tardiness and the timeliness with respect to folks getting to work. And I'm saying this publicly for all of the civil servants because it's their duty. They're being paid at the end of the month. It's their duty to show up on time and to do the people's work. That will guide me into the next question that I have with respect to PwC was in. We talk about pay and compensation. Now, I don't have any issue in terms of increasing pay for civil servants because I believe maybe it was more than 10 years ago that they even get an increment or something like that.
Much more than 10 years.
I was a minister in government in 2008, 2009 when we had to reduce the salaries. We increased the salaries one year when things were from a financial standpoint, were moving along. And then lo and behold, that was a global depression in 2000, the latter part of 2008, 2009, when everything fell off the cliff, and then you had to back off and so on and so forth. Yes, the good Lord has blessed us, and there are a few dollars around, and civil servants, rightfully should be compensated. I think the wage workers, the pensioners, they all should be involved in getting some sort of compensation. But then I would want to tie it in, again, to not only performance, but your responsibilities that on the job and the customer service training and so on. Where we are in terms of that, I think it was PwC price.
PricewaterhouseCoopers.
Right.
You're quite right, Honorable Rogers. So
They said Neil, Honorable Rogers.
You're quite right. I think there's been a lot of interest and expectations around this pay and compensation review. Just to kind of lay the ground. I'm gonna get to your question, but I just want to again reiterate the point that we restored public service salaries to what they were in 2008, 2 years ago. So at this point in time, persons are being paid what they were paid back in 2008.
Well, don't say that too loud, because those in the Department of Health Services, the former HAA employees, they may ask you a question or two about that. But go ahead, sorry.
Right, I'm just saying, just starting with that fact alone, I cannot think of any good or service or product that you paid today or you paid in 2008. So we could just start there and understand the logic of it. We haven't done this since the last time we've had a proper look at this was back in 2005. So we're talking more than 20 years since this matter has been examined in a real way. So over the years, we've had concerns about retention, competitiveness, morale issues, and so forth. So this review was intended to kind of modernize and just update the whole entire pay structure. So it's not just a matter of giving persons a raise. It's just a matter of looking at how we pay and compensate persons across the length and breadth of the public service. And I know you were quite adamant and quite strong and very forceful in that we ought to pay particular attention to the health services. And I know that public PwC did consider that. They were awarded the contract sometime last year. The report was initially scheduled to be delivered. The exact date was February 26, 2026. It was about 2 weeks late. Not through no fault of their own, but through our fault, on the GOA side, because when we submitted when we first did the compensation philosophy, we had asked for the job descriptions to be submitted to them for them to have a look at. I think some of us got a bit creative with our job descriptions, so we ended up in situations where some heads of the department, if you were to apply the framework, what ended up making more than permanent secretaries based on what they would have proposed. So August, it took us a bit of time. So not only was late, and it took us a bit of time to kind of walk through and resolve and smooth out those issues. Because at the end of the day, there is a hierarchy that needs to be maintained in the public service. We gotta be realistic about it.
Yeah, we gotta be realistic about it. But I'm a practical person too. You mentioned that with regards to the scheme of things that were going on, if you continue with that, there was some heads of departments or someone else within the department would have been making more than the permanent
right,
secretary.
if you simply accepted what they would have put forward as far as the job descriptions.
And while there's a hierarchy, you need some structure and guidance. Again, for me, pay and performance.
Well, I was coming on to that. So we've gotten to all of that.
Yeah.
They would have given us the final report. Now, again, I've said all these things publicly as well. The difficulty is now you now have to map almost close to 1,200 employees who are at different grades, at different points on the scale, over onto this new grading scheme. And that took we had some AI assistance, but it still took quite a bit to kind of verify and make sure that persons were properly placed on that scheme. That's taken a bit of time. We would have discussed the matter with yourself and your ministerial colleagues recently. However, I think the Premier, rightly so, asked for some further work to be done as it relates to the statutory bodies, wage workers, and of course we have to consider the implications of what's going on in the world economic context. And because more than anything else,
Pensioners too.
Huh?
You know, you got to do something
exactly.
for the pensioners too.
So more than anything else, I think everybody understands that whatever we do has to be sustainable more than anything else. So that's where we are right now in terms of
Right.
moving it forward. Our target date for implementation, again, still remains May 1st. I know the date has passed.
Right.
However, we expect that in June.
You can do it
we'll have-
retroactive.
Exactly. So we've already agreed that you will see, and I've put out a release to the public service as well. So you will see your new salary reflected in your June pay along with arrears for what you should have been paid in May, because we already said that this is effective the 1st of May. Now, in terms of the pensioners, again, that's not necessarily within my remit, but I do understand the cost of living has gone up and so forth. But at the end of the day, whatever is done has to be sustainable. So it all has to make sense.
Yeah, you see what happened is that, and we don't need to shy away from this. Whatever the sources are in terms of revenue,
Right.
okay, thank God for it. But at the end of the day, the civil servants, the wage workers, the pensioners are the shoulders that we are standing on.
They've been the public service. There's no doubt that
That's right.
they've
You know
made
what
the
I'm saying?
contributions. We are standing on their shoulders.
That's
I
right. We are
accept that
standing on their
completely.
shoulders, and they should be included, whatever the nomenclature is in terms of their grading and stuff like that. I can't sit
Remember, they've retired, so it's not a matter of grading them. I guess it's a question
Well,
of what adjustments would you want to make
that's
to
what I'm saying.
account for the cost of living and so forth.
what you can call it,
Yeah.
whatever the nomenclature is, whatever you name it, and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, I am strong about that. That the pensioners must be able to get, whether it's cost of living or living allowance or adjustable allowance or whatever it is, because at the end of the day, they have to go to the same supermarkets and purchase the same items that a permanent secretary would do. When you go to the grocery stores, it's not pensioners over here with 40% reduction, active permanent public servants employee here or anywhere else. And at the end of the day, we all in this together.
I accept that completely, and I think
yeah.
at some point, perhaps it's a policy decision that the government will have to take as to how they wish to address that.
And that would be my advice to them. You know what I'm saying? And believe you me, I feel very, very, very strongly about that.
But I do have to, not to be accurate, I do have to say out loud, I would hate for your viewers to be left with the impression that somehow what happens with the pensioners is up to the deputy governor. I think I just want to make that clear.
No.
That's not a decision
I wouldn't want
for
them
me.
to do that anyway. It's a holistic approach.
Correct.
Because the deputy governor won't be able to get his new salary unless the government decides.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. So whatever we do, it just has to be sustainable. That we got to make sure that
like I say, the sustainability of, let's say, putting in place a living allowance for the pensioners, is not going to break the bank, so to speak, because if you compare what that allowance would be and the numbers per se, I don't know how many pensioners they have now. But I can guarantee you that some of the folks, like Teacher Roslyn, for example, who's been a pensioner, she's 95 years old, I believe, something like that. And I am sure, I will find out what a pension is. It can't be anything, the amount of years that she was there. Should we, look at an increase in salaries for all of us, and not a living what you call something wage,
The living wage,
a
yeah.
cost of living wage or something like that for the pensioners. It must be included.
No,
Absolutely. All of them.
I totally accept that as a matter worthy of consideration.
Yes,
I,
it is.
I accept that completely.
Yeah. Even if we have to remove a 5% or 3% from everybody, but they must be included in,
Yeah.
in what is.
No, like I said, you're not going to hear an argument from me against that. I certainly think that is.
I wouldn't want to hear that because, as I just said, the civil servants and you, the deputy governor, the increases that legislators like us would get, it all depends upon, the decision that we as elected members of government would make. But I don't want to go away now without saying this and saying it again to reiterate it. Yes, I believe in increase in pay, but pay must be in concert.
Yeah, I was
with
sorry.
performance.
That's the point I didn't mention. That is part of what we asked Pricewaterhouse to look at in terms of increments being automatic, as opposed to it's got to be part of that, because we really want to get this performance management culture embedded. Having said that, I do really want persons to be honest about person's performance as well, because I find, in my view, one of the difficult things is actually getting persons to be honest about their colleagues' performance. That's nobody's prepared to write or document anything. That's one of the biggest challenges that I find in terms of the whole performance culture, the whole holding people accountable. That's one of the big challenges, having persons to be honest about how others are performing. So yeah, I think built into this new regime is the idea of increments, how people progress in the public service, and that is directly tied to their performance.
It must be tied to the performance. And I will harp on that. I'll continue to harp on that.
Again, that's one, again,
in terms of the performance.
and every time I speak to the permanent secretaries about these issues, I always use the analogy of building a house. Any one of us who's built a house, you have in your head, you pay a worker to come and plaster your house or run some blocks. You have in your head whether or not this is value for money. Whether or not the guy came, he laid 20 blocks. Somebody else who's getting 100 blocks a day, and once it's not, and you make a judgment as to whether or not you're getting value for money. And the public does that with the public service all the time. I'm paying all these taxes. I'm standing in line at an avenue. I'm paying my bills. I'm paying my taxes. I'm paying this levy, and you say to yourself, am I getting value for money? That's a legitimate question to ask. And I think we as a public service do need to be able to answer that question in that form that yes, you are getting value for money.
And you mentioned standing in line and stuff like that at IRD and so on and so forth. A lot of complaints, we get them from time to time. There's only one cashier, and there has 3 or 4 cubicles and only one cashier, 2 cashiers, and the whole place is filled and so on and so forth. Again, I'm hoping that under the leadership development that we'll be able to move around. I don't know what a human resource capacity.
I think we've been trying really hard to kind of push more of these services online to avoid standing and physically standing in line. We've been trying to encourage persons to make use of the online portal to make payments and kind of engage with us in that way. And once it's not, to pay your bills online, use online banking rather than having to come.
Another point before we close off. In terms of the human...
Closing off already? I'm getting comfortable. I'm enjoying the conversation.
In terms of the human resource capacity,
Yeah.
Within the civil service, the technical expertise and skills force that we have, whether it's in MICU or in any other areas, I think that is something that really and truly, from our training vote, that we've got to prepare our people so that we'll be able to manage, and we'll be able to deal with the changing tides within the society. Of course, I must admit that every other Friday we do have a session with the technical folks, and you sit down and really, make sure that we're getting things done. You talk about value for money, but at the same point in time, it makes no sense to have the money around and you're not getting anything done. So again, we've got to look at the capacity, because we as elected officials will always say, hey, we want as many of our people local, especially the electorate, to be involved, as opposed to outsourcing. But at the end of the day, if you need things done and you have to outsource it,
Yeah. Well, what I would two things on the training part of it. You will recall that we just considered the priority training needs for government. I thought it was for Anguilla recently. And again, it's in the budget. This is a publicly available document, and we've allocated just about $6 million EC dollars for training this year. And to me, I think that's quite commendable in terms of what we've been spending on training and human resource development in this country. Now, again, these things take time to manifest themselves, but the fact is we're making investments. Somebody's going to be in college for 4 years, you give them a chance to build up the expertise, but in time, that investment is going to bear fruit.
Yes.
So this whole idea of outsourcing things will become less and less of an issue as time goes by.
We'll hope so.
But I think it's quite commendable in terms of the level of investment that we make in training year after year.
The thing about it, I'm easily confused. But when you dig a little deeper into that $6 million, right? That $6 million isn't $6 million, let's say, that has been allocated for training that will begin this year. That $6 million, my understanding, is that the continuation of payments for so on. So to break that down, and I haven't as yet, maybe it's just about 3 million or 2.8 million for this year alone. I don't know what the figure is. But my understanding is that $6 million, let's say if you have 2 doctors that are out there studying, it's going to take 5 years.
Right.
So their tuition would be involved in that. Those continuing on their course, is involved in this.
Yeah, correct.
So for me, if you're going to say $6 million, let's say $6 million, that is going to start this year and so on. But we'll look a little deeper into that.
Yeah.
But I'm pleased that the training is there. I was also told that the money that was allocated in 2025, that all of it wasn't utilized as well. And the other thing, DG, I would want to say to you here is that this training, is not just for civil servants. Mm-hmm. This training should be for Anguillians, whether you're in the hospitality industry or whether you're in the construction industry or whether you want to do plumbing or whatever. You don't have to be working with government in order to be able to get to utilize this sort of training. And I just say to the general public and to our young people, get whatever is required so that you can get yourself into college or university or technical school and so on and so forth. Because there's a myth, whether it's reality, that you get into the civil service and that the scholarships and the funding is sort of set aside
for public servants.
Yeah, earmarked for civil servants. So I really and truly, would want to get that out there.
I've heard that as well. What I do acknowledge that I've had the discussion with the PS Public Admin and the team across there that we can and should be doing a much better job of publicizing these opportunities. And they've got a plan on how that can be addressed. But for now, I would encourage your viewers, your listeners, anybody that has a child of university age who's interested in going out, pay a visit to public admin to see what's available, to understand what the process is and so forth. I would encourage that at this point, even though I said we could do a bit better in terms of publicizing opportunities, but I still would encourage persons to stop by the Department of Public Administration to kind of understand what's available, the processes involved, the timelines and so forth, and how to make an application. I think they'd be more than happy to receive that, those queries from members of the public.
Well, I must admit, we politicians, we are always out there. I must admit that there's an increased level in the young folks wanting to go off and train. I've been saying to them, the numbers that approach me, you go to public admin, but what is important is that you apply to the school or the university, you get your acceptance letter, and then bring it on. Let's see what you can do.
That does make a difference. If you've already been accepted.
You've already been accepted and so on and so forth. So some people will have the notion, and some parents, are going up to public admin to get a scholarship, or to seek funding for my daughter or son to go abroad, Then you wait and see, well, okay, they're not accepted and so on and so forth, And another thing in terms of education, we would have had conversations here about that. And this has been going around for quite a while, and I take some responsibility and blame for that as well. We should have been further ahead in terms of our technical skills. dropped the ball on that. Didn't do as much as I should have done, to in, increase and improve the quality of our technical training. 'Cause
But
that's-
what I can say is that I think don't wrap yourself too hard on that.
oh no, I'm not wrapping myself. I'm just being open and honest.
Yeah.
There's quite a bit more that could have been done. So I you see when
No,
you,
the reason
when,
why I said
when
that-
I point a finger at you, you know how much is coming back at me.
The reason why I said that is because I know that has long been recognized, and there's been a lot has been invested into the Angola Community College in terms of the TVET programs and so forth, City and Guilds, to build up the technical trade. So the foundation you laid, I think, is going to be built on.
Yeah.
So when we sit here a year from now, we should be having a different kind of conversation about our technical.
Definitely,
Yeah.
I would want to do that.
Yeah.
And when I say I'm not, wrapping myself, I'm just being part and parcel of not being able to see a better outcome for the foundation
Yeah.
that we would have laid. Deputy Governor, it was a pleasure having you here. There's a few more topics I had to discuss with you, but this is an open forum, and you will be back so that we can have some discussions, even after, this regrading and resalaries and stuff like that. Because we're going to come back and we're going to talk about customer service and folks not doing what they're supposed to do in terms of the tardiness getting to the job. You've got to do a better job in terms of that. Because when you look at the folks in the hospitality industry, for example, the customer service skills isn't there. And you're not on your job, you know where you are. What you say, up and out? You're out, So thank you very much for your time. Again, this is Just the Facts, and we're here to inform and educate, the general public in Angola and for those Angolians who are overseas, because a lot of us, believe it or not, does not know how government function. We think that the deputy governor can do just about anything, or the politician can do just about anything, but there's a mechanism in place so that we'll all have to work together in order to be able to move this country forward.
Okay.
And I'm saying to the permanent secretaries that the country depends upon you, just like they depend upon us. The electorate depends upon us, and we have to work together so that in the best interest of all the people of our beloved country. So thank you all very much for listening and for viewing of this Just the Facts. And God's willing, next Tuesday we'll be here again. Thank you.